Hey everybody, Sean Hammond with PremierGuitar.com here. Today we're in Nashville, downtown on Broadway, site of famous places like Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, Jack's Famous Barbecue, Ernest Tubb Record Shop, and of course, Gruhn Guitars. George Gruhn is the world famous vintage guitar expert, and he's got an amazing collection of acoustics and electrics. We're gonna go inside and say hi and check stuff out. George.
Hello.
How's it going?
Doing good and pleased to see you.
Good to see you. So we're at the bottom level of your shop, which is stocked with tons of amazing guitars. We got the Gibsons here and the Fenders and Gretsch's over there and all sorts of amazing goodness and banjos and acoustics
Plenty
in
of
the other
instruments and obviously plenty of people on a NAMM week, as well as the Chet Atkins Appreciation Society in town. So that plus the normal honky-tonk crowd on the street and musicians who play in them.
That's crazy.
It is semi-controlled pandemonium.
Especially this week. Well, before we head upstairs and take a look at where the process starts, when you get guitars in for consignment or you purchase them or whatever, you want to just tell us the general gist of this room and how much turnaround there is with guitars on the walls?
Well, this room is our main showroom, and I assume that you've seen or will see the rest of the room back there. The public sees this room more than any other, although those clients who want to see the really high-end vintage go up to the second floor. But there's still things down here that can be $20,000 plus, so it's not just all beginner-level guitars, but there's everything down here from a few $100s to as much as $10,000 or $20,000, and then upstairs there are things that are more. Third floor is storage, packing and shipping, and archives. Fourth floor is repair. The repair area takes more square footage than this floor has of showroom, but it takes more people and more hours of labor to repair one than it does to display it or sell it. The repair people may spend 50 or even 100 hours working on one guitar, and they need a complete workbench and a spray area and an equipment room. It takes a lot more space to work on one and a lot more hours than it does to display it or hang it on the wall for sale. So we have all of that in this building, spaced out over 4 floors. And I think one of the things that does make Gruhn Guitars different from most others is that we do have a large repair staff, a large amount of repair space, and a very considerable emphasis on that, because you don't easily get vintage guitars that are 50 to 100 years old or more that don't need work.
So go check out where that happens?
We'll see it all.
Okay, so we're up on the 4th floor of Gruhn Guitars with Eric. Your title again, Eric?
Oh, I'm kind of the manager of the repair shop here.
Okay. Now, you've got some really cool guitars. Obviously, you have like 650 awesome guitars in the whole shop, but 2 of the most recent things in here are this Esquire. You want to tell us about this one?
Yeah, this is a particularly nice piece. This is a 54 Esquire, pretty much all original. Didn't really require much work. A lot of these that come in require refrets and, you know, just from years of use and wear and tear. This one actually was pretty well cared for its entire life, with the unfortunate exception of on the back of it, it has some rot from a strap that was laying against it for
Can we see that?
goodness, you know, how many years it could have taken. But you can see the curly cord kind of burned into the finish. Unfortunately, there's really no way to get that out of there.
It was just laying on that for years and years. And
I'm afraid so, yeah. And obviously with a vintage instrument, refinishing it is one of the worst things you could possibly do. So it's much better to leave it exactly like it is.
looks like you can also see like someone had paper on there and wrote something and it indented into the finish.
Oh yeah, we've seen some interesting things hidden in finishes, you know. Blacklight shows a great many unexpected surprises, to say the least.
She might have pulled the ashtray.
No, go right ahead, just grab and pull it straight off, yeah.
So everything's stock on this pretty much.
This one's all original, all the wiring, the pots, everything, nothing had been changed on it at all. It's had a pretty easy life.
And everything worked just fine?
Everything, the pickups did not, or pickup single of course, did not need to be rewound, which is Always nice too, because that does affect the value if that happens. But no, that one's in good working order.
Did you have to remove rust or anything from the bridge?
Not really. This one, a lot of times that is the case with the metal parts that corrode over time, but this one was well preserved. I don't think it spent its life in a basement like so many of them do, and just over the years that corrodes and eats into them. But this one's in great shape. We're particularly proud of this one.
Now this is another one of the guitars you guys just finished up, right? It's 45 SJ?
Circa 43, yeah. Yeah, this one had been in repair for quite some time, about a month and a half of work to bring it into good order. Condition-wise, it's in pretty good cosmetic condition, but it suffered from the usual problems that a guitar of this age does. The neck angle, of course, being the most common, has to be removed and reset to bring it into proper spec. And the Gibsons have a wide heel as opposed to the Martins with a narrow heel, so it's a little more of a project to do a neck reset on those, but fortunately we have such a talented staff here, we go through them without too much difficulty. This one also, the frets were worn out, so it required a refret and on top of that, but all in all, it's turned out extremely well.
What required most of the work? I mean, a month and a half, that's a long time. What was the really tough job?
Well, some of it has to be done in stages. You know, that's one thing that makes these projects go really slow, is the gluing and clamping time, and you know, there's a lot of downtime just waiting. So, you know, you can work on it a little bit at a time. Plus, most of the guys juggle between 8 and 10 projects at a time. So we're kind of working at a little, pining away at each of them, I guess you might say.
Now we're talking with Greg Voros, who's going to show us a pretty interesting art shop here. Greg, what is this?
This is a late 50s D'Angelico XL. And it's kind of an oddball because it's an XL, but it actually has a wider top and back than a normal XL.
Is that like 18 inches?
18 inch. And this one had a ton of things going wrong with it. One of the number of things that was going wrong with it, it had right around 12 or 13 holes additionally drilled into the extension to mount a pickup and a pick guard. So instead of...
How many holes?
12 or 13.
Wow.
So instead of plugging 12 or 13 holes and then touching them up, I decided to replace the piece of wood and the binding on either side along with the back, and then once I do that, I replaced the binding first, and then I did the same thing with a piece of wood below it. And then once I laid the color on the piece of wood, I do the same thing to the top. And then once I have it all come together, it should look something like that.
Ah, okay.
So I color matched the binding, I matched the wood color, and then all of a sudden 7 holes on this side disappear. And I'll go ahead and mount the guard, so you're not going to see any of this really once the guard is put into place. But still, cosmetically, you want to make it look right if the customer chooses to take the pick guard off. The other thing on this was it had a cracked overlay that goes on the back of the peg head, and I want touching that up as well. So right now it's flat, so you don't get to see any of it, but I'll go ahead and get it wet so you guys get a chance to see. I wound up laying color on it from about there to there. So it all comes together. Once I get some clear finish on it, it'll look something like that.
Huh. Nice.
It'll look all right.
Now back on the pick guard, there's some interesting marks on the front. It looks almost like liquid dripped down, but that was actually because the original pick guard disintegrated?
Right, it was gassing off, and I guess the guard that was gassing off got in between the finish checking, and it kind of left lines like that.
And you can't really remove that without refinishing the whole guitar and sanding it and stuff, right?
Well, you could remove it, you just wouldn't, it would be a lot of work, and keep in mind, once the guard, not this guard, but one that I make is going to go on it, most of that's going to get covered anyway.
Okay, so it's just not really a good use of time or money to work on something that's going to be covered up.
That's it, but at the same time, we want to make it look right, you know, and we kind of pick different spots and where we want to spend the time. On this instrument, we have about right around $1,500 worth of repairs, so I want to make sure that I allocate enough time everywhere so that I don't go over that. and then George could actually do all right once we finish with it.
How much do you think this will go for when it's done?
High 30s, under 40 grand though, for sure. Refret it, make a nice guard. It'll be a great playing guitar. A guy will really enjoy it.
Cool. Thanks, Greg.
Anytime, man.
We have here a pre-World War II D45 Martin. This was 1941, is it?
Yes.
1941 model. We have the original tuners. The frets are in mediocre condition. They've been filed on and they really are no longer original spec. The neck set angle was terrible, so we've taken the neck out. The bridge plate had been damaged and the top under the bridge is damaged, so we will have to splice in some wood under the bridge and put in a new bridge plate. But still, this is an instrument that after restoration will be worth close to $200,000.
Wow.
And there were only 91 pre-World War D45s made.
That's incredible.
So
What's going on with the fretboard here with the cut in it?
this is where we popped one fret, drilled a small hole, which then went into the dovetail joint, run some steam in, and pop the neck out.
Okay.
Because the neck is set in with hide glue, and with just a very small amount of steam heat, you can pop a neck out. Martins are built with hide glue, or at least they were back before the late 60s, and it is very possible to take these things apart and put them back together again, unlike a lot of modern instruments which are built with synthetic glues and laminations. You take a laminated epoxy together guitar and run steam into that, and everything just, the laminations come apart. You can't work on them very effectively. But just like good old violins are the ultimate in instruments you can work on. You can pop the neck, you can pop the back, you can pop the neck out, but you can take the whole instrument apart and put it back together again. The guitar is harder to do than the violin, but at least the pre-war models you can work on, and many of the modern ones, especially the modern import, lower-end models, are for all practical purposes unrepairable.
And do you use the same types of hide glues when you're restoring these as were used in the first place?
We will use the correct original style glues in all applicable places. There are some applications where when you need extra reinforcement, we're not totally against epoxy in some places, but not many. And Andy, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, that will actually get somewhat of some epoxy, actually, but it'll be a lamination with graphite and wood for the bridge plate. Because of the damage that you see, there's actually a cross-grain crack directly in front of that bridge, so I have to come up with a way of supporting it so that as the top cantilevers forward from the string pressure, it doesn't break again. And matter of fact, there's an instrument directly behind us. It's the same similar thing going on, but the top it's been refinished, and the top is so thin in the area where the bridge sits, it wants to do the same thing. And matter of fact, it has. And that I've just finished up laminate up another piece of bridge plate material, which is actually maple, graphite maple, and I've hidden the graphite within the bridge plate. So when you look inside, it won't scare you. You won't go, oh my gosh, what did they do?
And basically, we're using modern technology in those applications where we feel it is warranted, and in some cases it is quite different from original construction, but it may be, sometimes it's just necessary.
Okay.
But we keep as close to original whenever we can.
Okay, George, so we're on level 2 of the shop, and you have amazing things up here, obviously.
It's a small area, but it's some of our high-end instruments. Of course, we have high-end things scattered throughout the building, but we have them concentrated right in this area. What I'm holding is a Gibson F5 mandolin made and signed and dated by their engineer, Lloyd Lohr, July 9, 1923. And that coincidentally is the same date as Bill Monroe's mandolin was signed. But the F5 was introduced in mid-1922, and the Lohr signatures end in December of 24. But the ones that are the most sought after tend to be 23, when they really had perfected their chops on this.
Now you get obviously some of the most amazing instruments in the world here. What are some of your other favorites in this?
Well, I have plenty of instruments. I'd have a hard time picking a favorite, but let's look here. We have a Martin. I like Martins. This particular one was made in 1912. This is original finish. It's a Martin 0028 herringbone trim, Brazilian rosewood. It's a cedar neck. Before they were doing mahogany necks, they were doing cedar necks. They didn't use mahogany prior to 1918. These are ivory friction tuners. The bindings are not plastic, they're genuine ivory. Martin was using ivory nuts and saddles, nut and saddle, prior to 1970. They were using real ivory for nuts and saddles, but back prior to 1918, even white bindings were real ivory. After that, they were ivooroid, a celluloid imitation ivory. But everything on this, it's white and looks like ivory, it is.
How much is this worth?
This guitar is priced at, I believe here, $23,500, which is actually less money than we would get for a mid-30s model, which is much, much, much more common. But this is the only unadulterated, original condition, friction peg 0028 I've ever seen in my entire career. And I've been collecting since 1963. I've never seen another. And then the next stage up for Martin, you've seen a style 28, you saw a style 42, now here's a style 45. This one belonged to Graham Nash, so it has celebrity appeal. It was made in 1920, and the style 45 by this time has a mahogany neck because it was made in 1920. The bindings are no longer ivory because it's after 1918, but it still has ivory nut and ivory saddle. It has the abalone on the front, on the sides, and on the back. So there's actually more than 3 times as much abalone trim. This may not look all that fancy, but if you start figuring out how many inches, linear inches of abalone trim there are here, there's there's at least twice as much on the sides alone as there is on the front here, because here on the sides you've got it there, and then around, and then up there, and around, and then you got the same on this side. So there's a goodly bit more on the sides of the guitar than there is on the front of the style 42. And then this has it also on the back, all the way around, as well as where the style 42 did, which is around here, there, and around the sound hole. But this was, in 1920, as fancy a guitar as Martin made. Here's a 1940 Stromberg G1 model, and not an ultra fancy one, but Strombergs are very rare. Their serial numbers go up a little over 650, except there aren't any with numbers under 300. Under 300 they were banjos. So there's only about 350 of these things that were ever made, and the ones from 40 onward that have the one-piece F-holes and one diagonal brace are the ones that people are really looking for. So this is something very, very special.
It's like an immaculate condition too.
This one's very clean. We have another Stromberg up here. This is a G5 model made in '53. Now, this is also an interesting guitar in that this has a 23.5 short scale. And the Birdland Gibson that was popularized and designed by Hank Garland and Billy Bird, and hence the name Birdland, had a 23.5 scale. And it's not coincidental that Hank Garland had one of these with a short scale, and he did a lot of his recording work with it. So this is an instrument that actually played a role in the development of the Gibson Birdland guitar. This has the neck dimensions of a Birdland, and it came before. Yes, Birdlands are narrow and they're short, and The body isn't, but the neck on a Birdland is 23.5 scale and narrow. This is the inspiration here for the Gibson Birdland guitar. This is not something where Hank Garland simply single-handedly came up with the idea all by himself. Elmer Stromberg was making these, and he had one.
Yeah.
So there it be. We have a Knudsen harp guitar. And Chris Knudsen
What year
in
is this?
Seattle. This one, frankly, is probably close to 1920. But this has the bass, 5 bass notes, standard guitar neck, and he also designed Hawaiian-style guitars, which inspired Weissenborn. Knudsen was very influential. He didn't make that many himself, but he was in Seattle. His workmanship is kind of crude, and necks made out of pine. That, you know, it's a wonder that they've lasted at all.
What's this?
This looks like some very poor grade of mahogany, but it's
Spruce top, right?
yeah, it's a spruce top. But most of the wood in the Knudsens is funky. But the instruments actually do sound good and were historically important and influenced makers who followed. Got an old Epiphone Emperor. This was made in '46, and at that time this was a top-of-the-line model Epiphone orchestral rhythm guitar, 18.5 inches wide. So it's a big boy.
How they're squared off there.
They're done like a cello. If you look at violin F-holes or cello style, that's the way they were. So these are modeled not after Gibson-style F-holes, but this is modeled after cello-style F-holes. This is a Gibson L7 model made in 1936. And what's sort of interesting about it is these frilly, fancy inlays in some ways look like they'd be more labor than the inlays on a L5 or a Gibson Super 400.
Is it different wood around inside the
There is
rectangle?
what they have is a rectangle in this inlay that is actually white binding enclosing a rosewood block with pearl inlays. So they are actually inlaying blocks that are pre-prepared. So it's a
From a
rosewood
different
fingerboard.
plank of
It's a,
rosewood,
yeah,
right?
it's a different plank of rosewood. This is a rosewood fingerboard into which they cut blocks
Yeah.
and inlay these pre-prepared inlays with a white border, rosewood, and inlays. But that's still, in many ways, seemingly more work than you'd have on an L5. This is a 1940 Gibson L5 cutaway, and you can see that it has inlays that are really, in some ways, less work to
Yeah.
do. But this was the more expensive guitar, and the L7 is a very well-made guitar, but it still cost less than the L5. But this is a 1936 L7 and a 1940 Gibson L5 with a replacement white bridge top.
And there's some pretty crazy finish checking going on.
Yeah,
there,
it's
too.
got
Really
plenty of finish
small.
checking, but it sounds really, really good. It's a great guitar. But here's an example. This is a 1937 D28 herringbone trim, and it's in good shape. It shows some wear, but it's still clean. And this is a very, very sought-after guitar. This is something less expensive when new than those Style 42. It's not as old, but this is more than twice as much money. So if price is supply and demand, the demand for D28s is greater than the demand for those early Martins
Yeah.
I showed with the ivory trim and those ivory friction tuners. And the ivory friction tuners look really great, but they're
Yeah.
hard as heck to
Right.
tune with. And they really aren't designed on those guitars for anything other than gut strings, whereas this is a steel string dreadnought guitar, which is an ultimate bluegrass or
Right.
country guitar. and will bring more than twice as much
How
money.
much is that one?
This one's 80,000. And we have things like D18 models from the 30s. Like this is this one's a 1938 D18 that is a really pretty darn clean one. In fact, this one is so pristine, it's never had any work done on it at all. It's the original bridge saddle, no chopping down on it, no neck set, no work, no adjustment, nothing. That's original. And so this guitar is $50,000, but it's never had any work at all, which is very rare. But frankly, in my opinion, to be set up optimally, we would recommend a neck set. But
Do you get people who are picky about even that? Like, I'm not going to buy it if it's ever had the neck reset?
Well, in this particular case, I would recommend that the buyer get the neck reset because I think that the action really should be a bit lower. If you're playing backup bluegrass, the action's fine. If you're playing anything other than backup, you'd want the action lower. And we would recommend setting the neck, but we haven't done it because that's one where it's a consignment and the consignor doesn't want it worked on, but he says whoever buys it can get fixed by us however he wants it. So, okay, let him.
How about over on your electric
On
wall
the
over
electric side, here is a Gibson EB bass.
here? Wow.
This was made in 1956, but the model came out in '53. And this was Gibson's first model electric bass. In fact, this screw-in end pin had in the case an interchangeable extension one, like you could use for upright bass. You could have it where it would come out, and it is
A long
built.
post to hold
Yeah,
it up.
right. And this isn't built in some ways like a Les Paul. It's got the carved top, and it has imitation painted on F-holes and imitation painted on bass-style purfling. Has a real big single coil muddy sounding pickup. Banjo-style Clouson tuners, which was pretty standard for Gibson basses before 1960. But at the time this bass was made, Gibson's line of basses was this one. You could get this, or you could buy a Fender or something else. But so far as Gibson basses, this was it, because in '56 they didn't have a hollow body EB2 yet.
Right.
The EB2 is using a ES335 style body, so that didn't come out till '58. So this was the Gibson bass line at the time that this instrument was made.
And you're valuing that at $3,500?
This one, yeah, it's not high. It's 35, and that is. It has had a peg head repair, which is really hard to see, but we did repair the peg head, and otherwise it would be a bit more. But it's still very strong, and it's quite affordable. We have here a 1960 Les Paul standard, and so we do have, I think right now we have two 60 standards. Yeah, there's one downstairs and in a display case, and there's this one up here. So we've got two of them right now. Here, I believe this is a 54. Interestingly enough, when Mike Bloomfield was playing his Les Paul with the Butterfield Band, he was playing a 54. And I have vivid memories. I knew Mike, and I was there at the time at the University of Chicago where they frequently played. That's sort of the home base of the Butterfield Band. And Bloomfield went to the University of Chicago High School. When I first met him, he didn't even play electric yet. He was an acoustic blues player. But he played first a Telecaster, and he switched to a 54 gold top like this. And I still remember very well, occasionally I'd find one that looked like this. And people didn't want it. It was not gold. It had that tune-o-matic bridge, which they said killed sustain. And it had the humbucking pickups, which people said were sickly sweet and syrupy sounding. They wanted one like this because Mike played it. And when Mike got one of these here, 59, all of a sudden the people who had said this was the best, within a matter of weeks, they couldn't recall having said that, and now they wanted one of these.
Yeah.
So Bloomfield, I think more than anybody else, was responsible for revitalizing interest in Les Paul models. And it wasn't Les Paul himself, because the R&B people didn't even know who Les was. In fact, I remember back in the late 60s getting a call from a guy who was looking desperately for a Les Paul model. And he had no idea who Les was, but I guess he knew enough French. He looked, and it's a Les Paul.
What's going on with the finish here where it's bluish green?
The gold color is achieved by having brass flakes, very small, tiny brass flakes, in the lacquer. And brass oxidizes green, as does copper. And brass, of course, has copper in it. There is no compound brass. Brass is an alloy.
And did it oxidize easier here because the arm sweat had rubbed off the top coat or something and exposed it more? Or?
If you sweat, it's going to get into the finish. And when it does, it will oxidize, and when it does, the finish will start to peel and turn green. And that's why when they did the all gold models, it had gold even on the neck and back. Gold finish on necks is not a bright idea because it is going to turn green and flake. And for that matter, as far as I'm concerned, gold isn't a very good idea at all on finish because it just isn't going to wear well. It does not age gracefully. The sunburst finishes, when they have honest wear, can have a nice relict, played-in, good-aged look. But a lot of opaque custom colors, including gold, at least in my opinion, don't age very well. They don't wear, doesn't look cool. They look really nice when they're pristine, but some things just, when they're played in, have a good look, and others just don't. So
now, I got to ask about the scratch here, and particularly I'm intrigued about the pickups that have the adjustable pull pieces on one side.
this is Gretsch's projectisonic stereo system on a Penguin, which is an incredibly rare model. This pickup picks up only 3 strings. This pickup picks up only 3 strings. And what you get is stereo giving the bass side out of one channel or one amp and the treble out of another. So if you're playing Chet style, where you're doing bass on this side, or Merle Travis style, and you have treble on here and bass with your thumb, you're getting a stereo situation. It is quite different from Gibson's, where Gibson's would give you one pickup and another pickup out of a different channel. I mean, this is also giving you one pickup out of each channel, except these pickups are both always on. With the Gibson stereo system, you get your rhythm pickup out of one channel, your bass pickup and the treble pickup out of different channels, and you can still use one pickup at a time should you wish. Not here. This particular instrument does have a replacement tunematic bridge and a replacement Bigsby, which we would never do, and it has Grover tuners. When I sold it to Dan Fogelberg originally in the early 70s, it was original. All these modifications are done by Fogelberg himself or his tech to make it suit him. And
it made you cringe.
well, he didn't ask at the time.
What year is it?
This one is, this would be right around 1958.
And it's got a brass nut.
Yeah, and that brass nut's also not original. But it suits what he wanted. He used it for many years. There's plenty of photos of him with it. This one has a letter from him and a photo of him with it. And he consigned it to us when he was terminally ill. And then after he died, it went off sale for a while, and his wife has decided that she would sell it, so here it is.
How much is that going for?
This one's $80,000. But it was a very important guitar in his career, and Penguins are very rare and certainly sought after and desirable. We have a 56 Super 400 CES with the Alnico 5 pickups, and at the time this was made, this would have been the most expensive electric guitar in the Gibson catalog, which shows that buying the most expensive one in the catalog is not necessarily always the best investment. because it will bring less money today than a gold top Les Paul of the same year. Because if you have a 56 gold top Les Paul, it would have P90s, tune-o-matic, and stop tailpiece, and it would bring more money than this. And that's true for a lot of instruments. For example, a Martin D45 was $200 new and will bring over $200,000 for a good one today. A Gibson Super 400 was $400 at the same time and won't bring anywhere remotely near as much as one D45 will bring. There's numerous examples that original list price when new does not necessarily equate to what it will bring as a used instrument. But we have obviously plenty of electrics. You don't see very many left-handed Strats with original tortoise grain guard. This is a 1964 model. And a tortoise shell grain guard is a rare custom option on a 60s pre-CBS Strat. And to find it left-handed is more rare yet. On the other hand, if you aren't a lefty, you may have a hard time playing it.
So this was a custom order. Do you have any idea who it was built
I don't
for?
have any idea who was the original owner, but it is certainly something that was not a standard stock item with left-handed and tortoise guard.
But none of these customizations were done after the
No, this
purchase.
this is original.
How much is that?
This one's not really all that much. It's $14,500, which compared to top of the bubble prices is not much.
Right.
So I guess not much is a relative thing, but for what it is,
If it were right-handed, it would be what?
well, most dealers
Double
are
or-
asking more than that now for a standard right-handed. And if you're a lefty, this one is sure enough a rare find. So if you happen to be lefty, that's a great piece to have.
If it were right-handed, though, would it be worth like double that or something?
No, it would be very similar in price. We have a couple of early Strats. This is a 54, so first year of issue, and old enough to have the round holes in the back plate rather than the oblong. So this is, and its serial number is 0981, so
Wow.
plenty early, quite clean. And this is another one that also, quite frankly, is less money than they would have been at the top of the bubble. So it's priced where it would be still affordable by a mortal musician. It's $37,500, but compared to what they were bringing back in, say, late '06 or early '07, it's cheap. It's less than half of what it was at the height of the bubble.
Wow.
So I'm not going to claim that instruments can only go up.
Right.
They are still subject to supply, demand, economic conditions, and demographic shifts in the market. But it still works out that in spite of the economy, and in spite of demographic shifts and everything else that goes on, the same basic instruments that were in demand when I first opened the store 42 years ago are the ones that drive the business now. Back then, people wanted Tellys, Strats, Les Pauls, early P basses and jazz basses. They wanted
Dreadnoughts.
some early Gretches, a few model early Ricks. They wanted Martin D28s and D45s and herringbone trimmed smaller body models as well. They wanted pre-war F5 Gibson mandolins. They wanted pre-war flathead Gibson banjos. And we have some of those. But there's very few instruments that are bringing big money that were not sought after 42 years ago. The Strombergs or the Angelicos, they were sought after then. And they are still sought after today. And I expect that as long as people still cherish vintage guitars, as long as they still cherish good guitars, these same models are going to be sought after I'm gone. I'm still planning long term. I'm in my third building now. We're very cramped where we are, and the neighborhood is changing. It's more and more of a tourist honky-tonk neighborhood. And I'm seriously thinking about moving. So we will see how that goes. But I like instruments. This is essentially a business. It is a hobby that got out of hand rather than one that had a business model. I'm not sitting around as a number cruncher. I have people here who can crunch numbers. I'm not one of them. I have a passion for guitars that drives what I do. And I try to make that passion at least compatible with the business enough that it doesn't bankrupt me. But I would like to think that it's still fun, because if it were not fun for anybody, then people wouldn't be buying this stuff. It's supposed to be fun.
So there you have it, Gruhn Guitars in Nashville. A lot of awesome guitars, tons of amazing history. When you're in Nashville, be sure to come check it out. I'm Sean Hammond. Thanks for watching PremierGuitar.com.